Hey guys, what's up? It's Charlie here, and today we're going to be looking at things only 90s kids can relate to. Were you guys born in the 1990s? Well, then I'm going to ask you a question. How many of these things can you relate to? Things sure were different in the 90s, but were they better? Find out on this list. But before I take you back in time, why not subscribe and press the notification bell too? Coming up first, we have Tamagotchis. If you claim to be a 90s kid but never owned a Tamagotchi, then sorry, but you're not a 90s kid. Growing up in the 90s, this game was the biggest thing for a very short period of time. It was a small electronic device where you took care of a creature. Now, these games would really get kids hooked, and it was kind of manipulative now that I think about it. If you didn't care for your creature around the clock, it would pass away. Obviously, this led to many small kids thinking they really let their Tamagotchi pass away and it was their fault. This meant kids were playing these at home, at school, and even when they should have been sleeping. To be honest, a Tamagotchi pretty much qualifies you to be a real-life parent. Tamagotchis used to require so much assistance, more so than a regular kid. I'm sure many kids also remember resetting their Tamagotchis to get the right gender they wanted. Hey, you wouldn't want to get cooties from a girl Tamagotchi. Type a comment telling me whether you guys remember Tamagotchis and if you played with them or not. Next up is Origami Game. If you want to predict the future today, maybe you check out a horoscope in the newspaper. Or maybe you do some kind of Facebook quiz or app which tells you your future. But all 90s kids can agree the best way to predict the future is to use the origami finger game. You would ask this fortune-telling DIY piece of paper what was going to happen in the future. You would then pick a color, let's say you choose green, and then you would spell the color out as you move your fingers in and out. Then we'd peel back the paper and see exactly what our future would be. Maybe it would be something good, like you'd be a millionaire. Or maybe it would be something bad, like you would never get married. But it's safe to say in the 90s, this was the best way to predict the future. Comment down below whether any of your origami futures came true. Next up is cell phones. Nowadays you see 6-year-old kids with iPhones. But back in the 90s, iPhones weren't even invented yet. Nope, in the 90s you'd be lucky to even have a phone at all. But I'm sure we all knew that one lucky kid who had a Nokia Brick. The Nokia 3310, better known as the Brick, is said to be the strongest phone in all of existence. Unlike an iPhone that breaks every time you drop it, this phone never cracked once. Not only that, it had awesome 90s games on it. For example, Snake, which every 90s kid spent way too much time playing. Newer phones also had games like Bounce and Space Impact. But no modern mobile game has ever been able to match the addictive levels of old school Nokia games. Comment down below what you guys prefer, Fortnite Mobile or Snake on the Nokia Brick. Coming up next is movies. You may think that movies now and in the 90s haven't changed all that much. Sure, they have better special effects, but have movies really got better? Well, maybe not, but I'm sure we all missed the way we used to watch movies. Admit it, even though it was more inconvenient, who doesn't miss going down to the Blockbuster and picking out a bunch of films? You'd rent these, take them home, and then watch them. There was no watching the first 20 seconds, getting bored, and then changing the film. Nowadays, kids are used to using Netflix and have every single TV series and movie of all time. But in the 90s, you had to rent a VHS tape or a DVD. Although binging Netflix series is pretty fun, nothing beats going out on a Friday night and renting a VHS tape. The only thing I don't miss is those late fines when you forget to return the film. And to make 90s kids feel really old, did you know that recently the last Blockbuster finally closed down? Next up is scented markers. When you think of things kids take to school today, it's things like fidget spinners or their cell phones. But back in the 90s, if you had a certain type of marker, you were the most popular kid in class. Admit it, we all really miss those delicious smelling scented highlighters. These pens smelled absolutely amazing and everyone would be using them. If you had a set of these, you were the coolest kid in class. And maybe it was just me, but I'm sure everyone tasted these pens at some point. Okay, maybe that really was just me. Another thing I'm sure 90s kids remember are these Crayola mini stamper markers. These were regular markers which doubled up as stamps. You could stamp things like smiley faces, swirls, or music notes all over the place. Now, the smiley face stamps never usually came out very well, but they were still so awesome and fun to use. Any kids still in school today, comment down below, do people still have these? Coming up next is music players. Nowadays, kids just use their phones as music players. But back in the 90s, music players and phones were two different pieces of tech. Trust me, you couldn't get Apple Music or Spotify on a Nokia brick. That's why instead, 90s kids had CD players. I'm sure we all remember Sony Walkmans. They were an absolute revolution when they happened. And if you had one, you were pretty much the coolest kid around. You could insert any CD and play it on the go. And before they came around, kids used to carry around cassette tapes. Of course, it's much more handy to get all the music in the world on Spotify on your phone today. But nothing beats the nostalgia of listening to that Walkman while walking down the road on a summer's day. Coming up next is Happy Meal toys. Do you guys remember when Happy Meal toys were actually good? Back in the 90s, kids used to go to McDonald's specifically to get the toys. I'm sure we all remember McDonald's changeable toys. These were some of the most rare McDonald's toys which came in Happy Meals. Nowadays, Happy Meal toys make me kind of sad, but back in the 90s, Happy Meal toys were the biggest thing and got every kid super excited. And if you were a 90s kid who actually collected these Happy Meal toys, you could be very rich today. For example, if you have Ty's Teeny Beanie Boos from 1999, these sell for around $500 today. If you have Underwater Monsters, these also sell for a similar price. The 1994 Power Rangers sell for around $300. And Mario toys from 1994 sell for about $200. So check if you have any of these old school Happy Meal toys and you could become rich. Just make sure to cut me in for giving you this info. Coming up next is computer games. Today, I think it's pretty clear what every kid is playing on their computer. That, of course, is Fortnite. But what about in the 1990s? What were kids playing on their computers? Well, if you had a Windows computer back in the 1990s, I'm sure you played chess and solitaire on it. And who could forget playing Minesweeper on the computers at school back in the 90s? Also, instead of PlayStations and Xboxes, 90s kids used Game Boys. Game Boys were the best console at the time as you could play Pokemon on them. I'm sure every 90s kid remember the fantastic Pokemon and Zelda classics. But comment down below which is better, Pokemon Go on phones today or Pokemon Classics on the Game Boy. And finally on the list of things only 90s kids can relate to, we have crayons. Now, of course kids use crayons today, but they're just not as special as they used to be. Think about it, what do rich kids in 2019 have? That's right, iPhones and AirPods. But back in the 90s, if you were rich, you had the 64 Crayola crayon set. But if you were a rich kid back in the 90s, you had the 64 Crayola crayon set. This was the ultimate set of crayons and you had every single color imaginable. Everyone would have wanted to borrow one, but if you had any sense, you would have said no. It was so easy to lose and break these crayons. You would start with the full set, but then in a few weeks, you'd lose about 20. Check out the poll in the top right corner and you can vote for the thing you relate to the most on this list. For me, it's gotta be Tamagotchis, as I remember how fun those things were. And if you guys want some more amazing videos, then check out my second channel. It's great for 90s kids and kids today. But as always, thank you guys for watching. Check out some more videos on screen right now. Leave a like if you enjoyed, and if you haven't already, what are you waiting for? Subscribe to Top 10s.